Well, hey, and welcome to the Impactus Young Man's Podcast. I'm so excited that you decided to join us. Today, we've got Andrew Wood, my good friend, and we talk about what it means to be so busy these days. Every time I meet someone new or I chat with someone, hey, how are you doing? What do they respond? I'm busy. What if busyness and hurry is one of the biggest detriments to our physical and spiritual health? Today, we talk about being hurried sick and how it impacts our relationship with God and the relationships with those that we love. It's so easy to forget oftentimes what's most important, and that's our presence, our availability, our willingness to be in relationship with God and our families and our friends. So today on the podcast, we talk about how to hit the pause button, how to slow down, and how to Sabbath. Maybe you're thinking, isn't Sabbath just an Old Testament thing? Or maybe that's something that my grandmother did. Well, today we talk about how as young men, we can help lead ourselves and our families in having a Sabbath day each week. Now, this feels like a great opportunity to let you know about something that's happening in the next couple months. On November 18th, here in Burlington, Ontario, we're hosting a men's conferences. And if you know anything about our history, our men's conferences have always been a highlight. And we are so excited to offer our men's conferences both in person and online. And so wherever you're watching this podcast or you're listening to this podcast from, you can tune in. And this year, we are so excited to have Deeks Insurance as our premier sponsor for our conferences. And they're also sponsoring this podcast today. Deeks Insurance is a licensed insurance broker providing access to preferred rates on home and car insurance to faith-based organizations and academic institutions and charities while supporting ministry advancement in Canada. Call Deeks Insurance today at 1-800-240-5283 or go online at deeksinsurance.ca to find out how much you could save. Let's jump back into the podcast. Thanks for joining me, even though we're not in the same room, man. It's so good to have you here.
Yeah, it's awesome to be here. I love chatting with you, Jordan.
I'm actually at home today. You know how fatherhood is, and I've talked about having two kids on the podcast before, but today I had full intentions on being down to the studio to film this, but my daughter's home sick with a daycare bug. Man, do your kids get your daughter's in school now, right? Has she gotten sick a lot since being in school?
She hasn't yet. It's been actually a pretty clean slate lately, and we're thankful for that. But we know it's coming. We know we've got another, 14 more years of our kids bringing sickness home from the school. So
yeah, man. So Rachel went back to work recently. I don't know. I keep saying recently, but it's probably been like 4 weeks or so. And the kids, man, and us, like people are like, oh, Jordan, are you sick? I'm like, I don't know if this is a new sickness or if this is an old sickness. I have no recollection of. We just feel like we've been sick since the kids have been back. And so today she's home sick from daycare. And honestly, it's been a bit of a grind, Andrew, with Rachel heading back to work after about 3 years off or so, with the two kids. And Rachel and I we've been saying, or I've been saying more so than Rachel, that I just feel like kind of we're in a bit of survival mode where like the days just blend together. And it's like, you get home from work, you have supper, you clean up, you put the kids down in the bath, and, you try and clean up after they go to bed. And then it's bedtime, you wake up, you do it all over again. But have you felt that before as a dad and just as a young man, that you're just like in this rat race of just life?
Yeah, I can't distinguish between those seasons. I can distinguish between seasons of it feeling less like that and feeling more like that. But I don't know if I've experienced a season, especially since parenthood, that didn't include feeling somewhat like that. So I'm with you, man. I get it. And part of it is just the reality of the season that we're in. All the people who have older kids are like, man, you're right in the thick of it. And I'm like, am I? Like, does it change from here? Because it just seems like it's going to get more, not less. And they all say, yes, there will be a new season ahead of you. But it's you won't really know when you got there. You'll just look back and go, oh, wow, I am there. So
yeah, it's funny. I keep thinking like the next season, like I heard one time it's like parenthood or adulthood is just like thinking, keep saying to yourself, things will slow down after this, after this season. But, we're talking about this, but I think we're not exempt from, I feel like there's this chaos that's kind of in the world right now. And of course there is chaos in the world right now, but even on a interpersonal, relational, work level, everybody just seems a little, I don't want to say the word busy, but busy.
Well, we are. That's what we say about ourselves. It's like our badge of honor. Hey, how you doing? Good, but busy. We talked about this, Jordan, for months at our church. Like months, we talked about this very thing we're going to talk about today. And still the number one answer that everyone in the church gives me when I ask, hey, how was your Thanksgiving? How was your weekend? How you been lately? It's still good, busy.
Now, do you remember your parents talking like this?
I mean, I don't remember them when I was young talking like this, but that could be because I was a child in my own little world, right? Like, I wasn't thinking about busyness. I was thinking about, survival as a 4-year-old on the playground,
Yeah,
or
so true.
the social dynamic of what was happening, or the project that I had to finish.
Yeah, that's good. I'm wondering if this is a new phenomenon, but I bet you it's not. I bet you it's very easy for people of generation, of course, being interconnected and getting emails to your phone. And I have an Apple Watch now, which it just gives me more notifications, and it's just, I know it's elevated to an extent, but this hurried life has probably been around for a long time. And in fact, I recently saw that there's actually something called hurry sickness. Have you ever heard about that?
Yeah. What a weird thing. What a weird thing to be hurrying ourselves to sickness, especially, I mean, we're talking from the West. We're talking from Canada. Yeah. We're talking from, major cities in Canada where we have everything at our disposal. We're not living to survive day by day. And it's us who are getting sick from hurry. It's like, what is going on there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I did a little bit. I did a little bit of Googling on it, and just the whole idea of hurried sickness is actually a physiological response. It's a sickness that comes when you are basically just hurried into oblivion. And I appreciate your note about just like recognizing where we're doing this podcast from right now. Israel, Palestine, Gaza. We're here talking about what it's like to be too busy, and so I'm just very cognizant of that, and knowing that what we talk about today is nothing in comparison to kind of what they're struggling with. But hurried sickness, this idea of like constantly rushing through tasks or feeling irritable when there's a delay, or interrupting people when they're just taking too long. And I was reminded of this recently when Poppy and I were walking, and the whole time I'm saying, Poppy's my daughter, for anyone that's unsure about that. I'm just saying, hurry up, come on, let's go. And I look back and she's just like smelling flowers, man. She's laying on her belly looking at like a ladybug that's dead. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not even alive. And I'm like, man, I have lost my sense of wonder. I've lost my sense of pause. I've lost my sense of being able to just slow down and smell the roses, literally. Like, and I think that has consequences not only on our physical health, as hurried sickness shows us, it's got to be killing us spiritually. And I don't know. When I look at my own life, I know it has killed me spiritually. Just incessant moving busyness. What do you think?
Yeah, it's killing us spiritually, and it's killing us relationally, right? And that's the other day my kids were getting in the car and we had to go to a store. Now, we didn't have anywhere to be for 2 hours. Like we could have taken all 2 hours to go to the store that's 10 minutes away. And they're getting in, and I'm like, come on, get strapped in. Hurry up. Come on, let's go. And it literally dawned on me, like, what would happen if we just hung around for 10 minutes? They played in the car before they strapped in. And then I thought, like, will our relationship be better if I frantically, anxiously get them strapped in, get mad at them for having taken so long, and rush off to the store? Or will our relationship be fostered by giving them space to be playful and take their time because we had it? So, yeah. And then I was thinking like, man, if we get all this done quick, what am I going to do? I'm going to get home, and then I'm going to be anxious. What do I do to occupy the next hour with my kids? And then I'm going to be anxious there about the mess that's being made, or you know what I mean? So
yeah, it's so funny.
I 100% get it, and I'm with you.
It's embarrassing to say this, but I actually think sometimes I have to ask myself, am I just hurrying the sit down? Like, and for me, it's ultimately just to like get that dopamine hit of scrolling again on my phone. Like, am I legitimately rushing for what? Like, how many, like, where am I going? What am I doing?
Are you courageous enough to answer that question with yes? That's exactly what's happening.
That's
Because
exactly what,
that's exactly what's happening to me. Like I'm like hurrying, and then I'm like just to sit down and scroll fantasy football again and ignore my kids. Like,
yeah.
yeah, that's exactly what it is. We're hurrying to sit down and scroll Instagram to get those hits, and that's probably why this generation struggles in a different way than other
Yeah.
generations. Because kind of like we said earlier, like you used to hurry just to survive, and then when you know you can survive for a few days, you could sit and relax. And we're not doing that. We're not taking that margin to actually breathe and relax. We're hurrying so that we can get to other things that are just hurrying us more,
Which is a vicious cycle, and like you mentioned, anxiety inducing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I heard you once say this, Andrew. That's kind of how it's affecting us interpersonally, relationally. But I have a quote here that I've kind of amended a little bit to shorten, and I want to read it. It's words from you, actually, from a sermon that you preached a couple months ago in the spring, I think, or in the winter. And I want to read it, listen to it if you're, and I just I want you to kind of unpack what you meant by some of these words. This is what you said. The speed in which we live is actually the greatest barrier to spiritual life and spiritual growth in the life of the Christian. The greatest barrier in our generation is how busy we are and how distracted we are and how hurried we are. We never can find a minute to spend time with God. The reality is that we live in a culture that's hurried. We're caught up in the fast-paced river, and we're just trying to catch up or keep up so that we don't get swept away by the current. The questions we need to ask ourselves is, what is the current that we're swimming in? Where is this river going? And well, what's the direction that we're heading in? And is this leading us to Christians being discipled and being formed into Christ likeness? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, just to be fair, that some of that is directly stolen from John Mark Comer, who's directly stolen from John Ortberg, who directly stole it from Dallas Willard. So let's be fair. I'm listening, and I'm trying to be a good listener, and try to actually look at my own life and reflect on whether or not those things that wiser people are saying is actually true. And I'm coming to find it to be absolutely true. The question that I've been asking myself and then our community like lately and constantly, because you never stop asking, is like, who is it that I want to become? Like,
Yeah.
what is it that I want to be? What is it that I want to be formed into? What's the kind of person? What's the kind of life that I'm actually pursuing? And it's so wild how easily we live and we react and we respond and we just kind of react out of habit to life's immediate and urgent needs, and how infrequent it is that we stop and ask ourselves that very question, like what is this turning me into? Like, where
Yeah.
is this going? Where is this river heading to? And do I want that? Do I believe in that? Is that the ideal? Is that just me meeting immediate desires, like kind of fleshly desires would be the scriptural language, kind of lower level desires or lower leveled loves, like Augustinian's lower level loves, or is it actually leading towards achieving a higher level love or a higher level desire or the life of the spirit? And we just don't. The problem with our hurriedness and our busyness, we don't stop to even ask that question. We don't even have the time to ask that question, let alone answer that question.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge, right? That's why we go years on years on years of just doing something that we look back and we go, that was insane. Why did I spend so much time just doing that thing that way, or spending all this energy on that, or working towards that goal, or building up that bank account, or you know investing emotionally in that investment? Because at the end of it we go, that's not what I really even wanted. It's not what I was pursuing. It's not what I desired at the deepest level. And so yeah, that's the barrier to actually becoming what we both feel as a Christian called to become, and as a human the deeply desire to become, because these
Right.
desires are actually, they're unique and personal, and they're universal, to be
Yeah.
known and to be loved and to contribute to the world around us in a positive and meaningful way. The barrier to that is the margin we take, the time we take, and the intentionality of choosing intentionally what direction we're heading in and what we're going to use our time for in order to get there.
Yeah, that was good, man. That whole language of like the river is such a helpful illustration. A friend of mine he was an addict who's now been, I think, free of like opioids for like 4 years now. And so it's
Wow.
real cool to watch him. And
Oh.
one of the key things he said that it really helped him in many different attempts of getting clean. The thing that really made the difference was when he began to play the movie to the end,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And so if I make this decision right now, and maybe it's not immediate, like I'm going to use drugs right now, but if I hang out with this person right now, let's play this to the end where I could see this going.
Mm.
And he said that was so helpful because he could see at the end of this movie was somewhere he didn't want to end up and be.
Wow. Yeah.
The problem is I find when it comes to our busyness and our schedules and just incessant, scheduling ourselves into doing things or just incessant phone use or whatever, which I'm talking about on my next podcast, is we don't play the movie out to the end. We don't say, who am I becoming? And the word that has been really hot right now in Christian circles is formation.
Yeah.
Right? We're talking a lot about formation, but a word that's being also kind of thrown around with that as well is deformation. That yes, we are being called to be formed, to be this formation into the likeness of Jesus, but there's also forces and currents at play that are deforming us.
Mm.
Like, what an interesting word to think that actually, when you think of deformations, it's not as it should possibly be. It's not as maybe intended or ideal. And what do you see that word deformation at work when it comes to busyness and habit?
Well, the reality is that none of us are, well, not none of us, most of us aren't doing nothing. Like, most of our problem isn't sitting on a couch without our phone, without watching anything, without engaging anything. Like, most of us, that's not the problem. We just have too much time and we're sitting in a field staring at the skies wondering about God. Right? Most of our problem is that we're always doing. And whether it's a productive thing, like in the direction of like hustling for work and career and finances, or it's like this kind of passive reactive thing, like just scrolling social media mindlessly or going down the YouTube rabbit trail. And the language of formation is like, we're all being formed by that. Right. I remember, I don't know, back in the day, and I think a lot of people can relate to this. Like, back in the day, you go to a youth conference. Acquire the Fire was our big youth conference we would go to as students, and it would be like, burn all your secular music, man. And it was kind of like this really religious, like, it kind of came across as like this fundamentalism, like everything Christian is good and everything secular is evil and burn it. Right. And like, we reacted against that. Right. And, but what there was something in that was true, which was that like everything that we're putting into ourselves and everything that is coming out of us in choices, conscious choices, or just habits and behaviors are forming us. And so the language of deformation is like, if you want to be formed into something in particular, you want your life to look like something, you think you're supposed to be aiming at some sort of higher ideal. Well, what you first need to do is slow down enough to be deformed, to look at what you are being formed into and what habits and rhythms and routines are forming you into that, because they are. And so I love that language that you use of like kind of looking far ahead into the future and ask yourself, is that who I want to ultimately become? That's the unique thing that sets us apart as humans from all the other animals in, the animal kingdom and beyond, is that we have the ability to do that. That is the gift of God for us to be able to project where things will lead us to. And the problem for us today and our generational challenge is that we just don't stop and slow down enough to project, and therefore to consciously choose the direction and consciously choose what we need to say no to in order to say yes to the ways of Jesus and to be formed into that ideal.
Yeah. In fact, I'm a part of a coaching group right now. And the first thing they get you to do is to write your positive end statement. Like, who do you want to be? And what's interesting is the exercises that they get you to do in this is they get you to, think about writing your own eulogy, right? Like, what do you want people to say about you at the end of your life? Or let's just say at the end of this program, you overhear your wife speaking in the next room about the change that's happened inside you. And so it's just interesting because for even for in this program to move forward, to cut off bad habits, to establish new ones, it starts with a proper vision of who you want to be. It's playing that movie to the end. And I think you're right. Busyness prevents us from stopping, from pausing and saying, what is actually forming me right now? And so the questions I would ask the guys that are listening is saying, if there's areas of your life that you just know, you can't really put your finger on why you do the things that you do. The question is, are you creating margin to just evaluate, put them on the docket again and say, okay, like for example, Andrew, I'm going to do a confession here. Are you ready?
Yeah.
I'm in this fitness coaching thing and I have to do 10,000 steps a day. Man, it's been tough. I'll be honest. Yesterday, I think it was like 4 p.m. I only had like 150. Okay. It was like, it was one of those days. Anyway, and so I've started walking at night and it's been so good, and I'm trying to do some reflection in there. But what's happened is, in my quest to become, more fit, I'm doing this walking thing. I always pass a convenience store on my walk. And I've just been kind of dipping in there on my walk to get a chocolate milk. And it reminds me that, like, even in my good habit, in my good desire, and I'm walking every night, I'm stopping in and kind of like the cover of night and throwing it in a garbage can before I get home, because like I still need that, like that sweet, that thing that I need. And for me, I have to ask myself that like positive end state. Jordan, who do you want to become? Do you want to be a guy that spends, chocolate milk nowadays is like $3 a little carton. It's like, do you want to be this guy that just is loose with his money? Do you want to be someone that just is craving sugar all the time? And so for me, man, that pause, even in my nighttime walk, I'm still having to fight that current that says, appease these inner desires, just do something else, go against the grain that's kind of your feeling. And so anyway, I say all that to say we're in a current, and it takes enough bravery and courageousness to stop. It's funny because when I asked you to do this podcast, I said, hey, can you do Monday? And you said, no, it's my Sabbath. And I thought, well, that's a fitting response to what we're talking about today. Well, listen,
the translation of that is, no, my wife will kill me if I do something else on our Sabbath because I keep failing at it. So just to be fair to all the guys who understand, it really is. No, she wouldn't. She's lovely and she's amazing, and that's not the case. But the point is, like, just like you said, okay, we decided as a family to Sabbath, but wow, it's so easy to fill that with something that that isn't aligned with what we originally said we want to do and who we want to become.
Let's jump into that, Andrew. I'm thinking about just the term of Sabbath. I'd love to jump into that a little bit, because if you look at the life of Jesus, he never seemed in a rush, right? Like, he seemed to stop. He seemed to have time. He's walking, sees Zacchaeus in the tree. Hey, come to my house for dinner. All right. Like, I'm like, where are the days of just random plans, just like popping into your schedule? And like, I think about the woman who touched the hem of his garment, and like, he stops. It's like, who touched me? Like, it wasn't like he didn't just keep moving. He paused. And when you look at the life of Jesus, what do you see that's helpful when it comes to rush, hurry, pause?
Yeah, one of the questions that was so compelling to me, hopefully it'll never leave me, was like, who are you when you're interrupted? That's a gut check, right? Like, what is that person, and is that person the person you believe you ought to be? Is that the Spirit of God in you, or is that some other kind of person internally when you're interrupted? And the beauty of Jesus' life is that Jesus' life, it was constantly interrupted, and it's in the interruption that it was so the profundity of Jesus's wisdom in teaching in the kingdom of God was often in the moments where he was interrupted. He was so clear of mind. He had time to address it. He had time to be present. He had time to step in. And oftentimes, just at least the way that our culture and society tends to work and live is interruption it brings the worst out in us, not the best. And that's to the contrast that I'm kind of visualizing and then attempting to aim at. Am I my best in the midst of interruption? And I think for me that's a marker of modeling the life of Jesus. If interruption is actually a gift to me, if joy flows through me when I'm interrupted, if what I have to offer people in the midst of interruption is grace and mercy and love, am I able to say yes to an interruption for the sake of relationship and embodying Christ to somebody? Or am I only able to offer them time and presence when it's scheduled weeks in advance,
or on your terms?
Calendar, and on my terms? That's it. Yeah,
man, I'm feeling convicted here, Andrew. You're preaching to me today, man. And it was, I think it was this morning, or maybe it was yesterday morning. Rachel's on her way out the door, and I always leave. I shouldn't say this out loud, but I've often left my keys in the ignition of our car. One day, tomorrow, my car is going to be stolen after this gets posted. But and so oftentimes in the morning when she gets out to the car, she has to kind of bring my keys back in. It's one of those things that I just can't seem to get a hang on. But anyway, this morning or yesterday morning, she came back to the house, opened the door, and I'm on my computer. She has my keys, and she just kind of wanted my attention just to give me my keys. And I was just like, without even looking at her, I was just like, yeah, just throw them on the chair. And I just like kept working, right? Just like, and then when the door closed and she left, I'm like, I didn't even give her the grace to look my wife in the eye. And again, a reminder that, man, it's so easy to just think that like this email to this guy is so important.
Yeah. Jordan, one of the gifts that you have been as a friend to me is someone who just stops in. I mean, people don't know this, but you just randomly stop by the church here in the office here. And those are a great gift to me. And oftentimes you're apologetic and do you got a minute? And the Spirit of God's constantly reminding me every time, especially after you leave, like always have a minute for that. Like that's the gift. The other day you stopped by and there was a ministerial lunch. You didn't even know what was happening. And you did practice this by stopping and actually sticking around and having lunch with spiritual leaders in the town. And that was a gift to you, and you were a gift to us in your presence there. And so you are living into it and you are striving towards it like we all are. The challenge for us is, Jordan, like, let's be honest with the men who are listening, like, we still have a bunch of emails to get through, right? We got jobs to do. We're responsible. We're trying to build something, right? We got podcasts to set up and post. We've got videos to edit. We've got, sermons to write, especially spiritual leaders who are listening to this. Like that doesn't go away. And so I'm learning now, it's like, how do I live that life of Jesus? How do I be formed in such a way that lends me margin for that, but also discipline in such a way that I'm still able to do an effective job in the work that I'm doing and be on task. Because what also people don't like, and that hurts relationship, is the guy who's like, says yes to everything but gets nothing done. You know what I mean? And so there's this balance somewhere.
Or the guy that doesn't have time for other people because he didn't use his time wisely when he had it.
Yeah.
Right. And that was a big learning curve for me when we had kids, and because like I'm like, well, I've got to work tonight. It's like, why do you have to work tonight? It's like, well, I probably didn't do enough today, right? With the time that I had. I'm just
that's the gift of Sabbath. Just to add on to that's what the gift of Sabbath is. The gift of Sabbath is saying, I am not too important to take a day to be with my family and present with God.
Yeah.
And it forces you to do that. And it's so painful. And it still is. Like, we're still working it out. And I'll be honest with you guys, the men on this podcast, like, there were a lot of Sabbaths that were my least like emotionally healthy days with my family. There was so much conflict in it, and you're fighting against something. You're wrestling with your own flesh, right? You're like the suffering that the scripture talks about, that we fight against, that we wrestle, we suffer in the name of Christ. Like, it's not just this external thing that's imposed on us. It's literally our fight against the flesh. It's a fight against something that is built into us. It's a rhythm and it's a pattern that we're just walking along with. And Sabbath, it forces you into this horrible space where you are saying with your body, I am not too important. I am not so important that I can't spend a day with Jesus, but it's not lovely all the time. Like, it's anxious in its own ways, but the gift is that will bleed to the rest of my life. Like the principle of it and the value of it and the truth of it eventually bleeds to other parts of your life, your other daily tasks, your other weekly responsibilities. And the goal is to be formed to the kind of person that, like, your Sabbath is a day with your family and a day with Jesus and whatnot, but it's also you're living this like daily life of being open to what God is wanting to say to you, wanting to do in you, and how he wants you to be present to others, and then figuring out the self-importance part, the roles, the responsibility, the tasks, the imminent kind of day-to-day stuff. How does that fit in? And what you eventually find, Jordan, and you're finding this and I'm finding this too, is what gets cut out, because there's got to be fat to cut, right? It's not like you don't get to have it all. And sometimes that fat to cut is, might be fantasy football. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it might be, I'm not watching any Blue Jays no one's watching Blue Jays playoff baseball. I'm not watching any baseball playoffs right now. And it's like, I don't regret that anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not on my Instagram, and I haven't been for a little while. And I'm like, a couple weeks was rough, but now I'm like, oh gosh, I have something better,
Yeah,
so
well, it's interesting because I've heard Sabbath, and we'll jump into kind of what exactly are we talking about here. But I've heard Sabbath described at times as spiritual warfare, which is, a spooky word for all of my Baptist friends, maybe, or some of my more conservative friends. Coming from a Pentecostal background, it doesn't scare me, but it's the whole idea that you are actually waging war against the enemy's current that he has for us. And, an old mentor of mine once said, Jordan, like the devil's not going to like tempt you probably with like booze and alcohol. That's just not going to be your vice. But he said, if he can make you too busy, or if he can make you, and actually it was, if he can make you marry the wrong girl or make you just incredibly busy, then he'll take you, he's happy with that. Yeah. And I thought, oh, what a good reminder. It is like you're waging against the tactics of the enemy in a spiritual battle when you are willing to say, I'm not too important to let this go, give it to God, and take some time to just pause and enjoy him and just say no.
Wow. That's good.
Yeah. Andrew, let's talk about Sabbath a little bit. We talked about Jesus not being in a rush, and some people would hear us talking about Sabbath and they might say, isn't this just like an Old Testament thing? Would you feel comfortable just unpacking what Sabbath is, what it was, and how we can talk about, as believers, what's a good way to practice Sabbath now? Would you be willing to do that?
Yeah. Sabbath, simply put, Sabbath is basically taking a day to be present with those around you and be present to God, and which requires you to say no to the stuff that you do all throughout the week. So that includes taking a break from work. A lot of times that means taking a break from like even housework. In the Jewish tradition, many of us know, like in some Orthodox Jewish traditions, like they won't even press a button on the elevator to go up to their condo. Someone's in the elevator on Sabbath to press the button for you. Like, and so there's this idea with it that it's like saying no to everything, all work, all tasks, all responsibilities, in order to be fully present relationally with those around you, and particularly with God. So that's kind of like, at least historically, Sabbath was a day to do that. So everything was shut down. There'd be no work. There'd be no commerce. There'd be no shopping. And we'd all actually take that day. What it's kind of became in the West, at least in the last few hundred years, it became basically our weekend, what we consider our common weekend. And so we used to, in the West, have a weekend off of work. We work 5-day work week, take 2 days off. Presumably one of those could be your day to get housework done. And then the next day is to worship Jesus with your family and maybe just kind of eat dinner together. But since we've lost the secularization of the West, what we've actually, instead of that time, the Sabbath, being used to say no to everything else and say yes to presence with people and with God, we're starting to use it again to either be the store that's open when the other stores are closed. So commerce again. We're using it to shop because, well, that's what we're doing to soothe our existential angst is buy things. We're using it to veg out on fantasy football or football in general all day. So just like kind of consume pleasure, leisure, etc. And so it's kind of it's kind of become that once again, something that's not quite actually restful and intentional, but is just like a break from the world to do pleasurable and leisurely things. In our experience, what we're aiming at with Sabbath is to reintroduce a block of time that is set aside on a weekly basis that is intentional in the direction of saying no to all the stuff that forms us throughout a week, all the responsibilities that impact us in a week, all the imminent task work, and in order to say yes to being present with one another and being present with God. And sometimes it includes like hanging out as a family watching football. My wife's from Indiana and they're Colts fans, so sometimes that includes a football game. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes, most of the time, that includes like turning off social media because that's a vice and that's a challenge and that's an addiction and that's not restful. And so it's like turning off phones altogether and being not someone who can't be contacted on that day. A lot of times we order out on that day. Like we eat together as a family, but we don't do dishes. Like we don't have a dishwasher at home. So like dishes for us is not rinsing and putting in a dishwasher. It's hand washing dishes
you should start a GoFundMe, man. Hey, if anyone wants to start a GoFundMe for Andrew to have a dishwasher.
I know it sounds so ridiculous and privileged to joke about, but the reality is like we live in a world where everyone has a dishwasher for the most part. We haven't had one for 4.5 years, and that's another side conversation. It's a gift in its own way, but it's also think about your life plus an hour of dishes every single night. You can imagine the
Yeah.
hurriedness you'd experience. But
Yeah, no, that's
yeah,
good, man. It's
so
interesting. If I can jump in here, Andrew, my experience before we kind of land on what it could look like, my experience of Sabbath in the evangelical, like, more conservative upbringing was like I wasn't allowed to do anything fun on
yeah,
on Sabbath. I wasn't allowed to enjoy, really, to be honest. Shout out to my parents who eventually came around. I remember the first day, dude. I remember it. I was on my yellow bike. They said, Jordan, you can go swimming. I'm like, and I like rode my bike away from that house as fast as I could before they changed their mind. I remember riding. I just remembered the freedom and the delight that I felt with my hair blown. Like it was just such a moment. Like my parents finally cracked. But like I remember one of my Sunday school teachers, man, that when it came to Sabbath, she wouldn't use scissors because it was work. And so our Sunday school crafts, we would all have to tear.
which is way more work.
Yeah. And so the people can get all mixed up in this, and you kind of did a very good overview of like what it has been in the past and what it can be now. I guess biblically speaking, as New Testament, new believers, the church, what would you say is the Sabbath? Like some people say, Jesus is our Sabbath. Have you heard much of that talk?
Yeah, and that was the interesting thing in the conversation. Like for me, Sabbath was new. It's not something that was ever talked about. So, and the preparation to teach on it and think about it and talk about it and start practicing it. I was amazed, by the way, about the thread of the concept of Sabbath all throughout Scripture. It's unbelievable. It's actually like one of the fundamental threads all the way through, starting in the creation narrative, all the way to kind of the eschatology, the eschaton. Like the thread all the way through is this aim at Sabbath rest and life to the full, for us with Jesus as King, right? So it was amazing to me to see like, wow, there's so much here scripturally, and it's more of like a general, like, this is the ideal that we're aiming at. The ideal for us, the kingdom of God is Sabbath rest. Hebrews talks about kind of achieving the rest and living into the rest, but the whole scriptures is about living into this kind of new garden city where we are fully known, we are fully loved, we're fully resting with Christ on the throne. The visuals are like just this feast together, like we got nowhere to go except for to sit around the dinner table and eat together and enjoy. And you use the word delight, and that's kind of the key, is to delight. Sabbath is to feel and live out delight. And so that's what we lost. Like, at least you were telling your experience a little bit in the past. Like, it became so like rigid and what's the word I'm looking for? Like legalistic, right? That it actually robbed us from the very delight that it actually is. The kingdom of God is not a place of angst and duty and obedience and here's the box and live within this perfect thing. It's actually the place of most freedom and most joy and most peace and delight. And so as we live in it today, our aim is like, what does it mean to delight as a family? What are the things that bring delight? Not bring pleasure, bring delight. Pleasure can be momentary, like chugging that chocolate milk and you get that fix, of those quick cars or whatever. Like, that's pleasure. And maybe there's some delight in there. But they're different. It's not leisure and pleasure. It's delight. It's goodness. I sense goodness. I'm at peace. I experience joy. This experience right now is what I hope to experience all the time.
Yeah, I liken it to kind of like feeling alive. And like when I think about some of the times I felt most alive, I think about one time my wife and I were just sitting at the end of a dock at the end of an evening in Hawaii, and there wasn't like a party going on. It was just my wife and I just chatting and dreaming and visioning and feeling grateful. We didn't really say, oh, I'm grateful, but just this overwhelming sense of like, we get to do this together and we're building a family and we're visioning what type of couple do we want to be? How do we want to serve God in this next season? And what's interesting is that idea of feeling alive. I think that's what Christ had in mind, really, when he talked about in Matthew 11:28, when he talked about, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you this rest, right? Yes. Like for so many people, walking with God, it feels heavy. It feels like a yoke on their back. And instead, it's like, no, take his yoke upon. He says, take my yoke upon you, learn from me. I am gentle and humble in heart. You will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy. My load that I put on you, it's not a burden. It's light. And so
Yes.
this call to actually feel alive in Christ, like, the whole language of new life in the Bible is amazing. But it's like, you see so many Christians that are not finding rest. It's like they become a Christian and then they work double as hard, as if their occupation or their employment wasn't hard enough. Now they've got to double down and do this thing that feels so difficult. And so that
that's spot
idea
on.
of finding life and life abundant and that joy and that delight, but it's not going to happen if you don't pause.
No, it's not. Eternal life is what you're aiming at. And I grew up at least in tradition that eternal life was after I die. And it was like, but not now. And the idea with Sabbath is to live the prayer of Jesus. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now I get to experience moments where I am intentionally living into eternal life today and experiencing and tasting the fruit of that eternity, which is perfect rest and delight in God forever, all the time. And we have the privilege and the invitation to live that out in moments and see glimpses of it. And that's what the Sabbath is intended to be. And so that what we do the other 6 days of the week are actually from a place of having tasted and seen eternal life.
Totally.
A glimpse of the glory of God, a glimpse of the eternal good future with perfect rest and delight. We get to experience it today in just little moments. And that should drive everything else that we do.
Yeah. It's interesting. You look at the scriptures, I often think the weekend is, and just the way we schedule our calendars a lot of times, like we work Monday to Friday. That's the way we talk, right? Like, and so we see Saturday, Sunday oftentimes. I don't know how you view it, but my whole life, I saw Saturday, Sunday as the end of a week.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas some people view it as the beginning of a week. But if you look at like even the garden imagery, from at the beginning, there will be a new garden at the end, but at the beginning, Adam and Eve's first day on the job was rest.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's like Christ is put into the fabric of our being, this desire, this want, this longing to actually start from this place of rest. And when we begin this relationship with Jesus, his invitation is not to come and work.
Yeah.
His invitation is to come and follow, come and rest. And we need to start there. We need to start with rest. We need to, not laziness, not a lack of work.
Yeah.
This isn't about not doing anything. It's about doing the thing that matters most. And so I'm curious if we can just, in the last 5 minutes here, what are some practical ways that maybe guys are listening and they're like, man, I've never given thought to Sabbath. How would you frame someone up to say, here are some things that you can possibly look into, try some disciplines to maybe begin Sabbathing, resting in Jesus one day a week?
Yeah, one of the guys that we kind of look up to and we use as teaching on this is a guy named John Mark Comer. I mentioned him earlier. He's building a curriculum called Practicing the Way, and it's about it really is about practicing the ways of Jesus and it's all about formation in the ways of Jesus. And so in the Sabbath model, they use kind of four movements. There's the first is to stop, which is like the obvious ones. To Sabbath is to stop, right? To Sabbath is to declutter. To Sabbath is to say no. To Sabbath is to like just everything, turn the off button. You got to start there, right? That's the whole unhurriedness, right? And then he talks about rest. And that's the second movement of a Sabbath is actually to take the time to breathe and feel rested. How many vacations do we go on that we come back feeling like we need a vacation, right? Yeah. All the literature says that it's like the 8th day of vacation is when you really start feeling rest. And we do these 7-day vacations. So we're always angsty. And the idea there is the same with Sabbath, right? Our Sabbath can actually create more angst than rest if we're jumping to worshiping or serving Jesus in the church, et cetera, mission and stuff like that. So the idea is to stop. You got to turn things off, and then you got to rest first. You just got to, there needs to be a component of that because that's the gift.
Sleep in.
Yes. Sleep in. Sit in your comfortable chair and breathe. I don't know. Like breathing exercises sound like so new agey and like whatever. And it's like, no, it's like, it's just your body. Like breathe so that your body can just feel a little bit of rest. And then the third movement is delight. So to delight is like, the stack your day with things that are actually bring you delight, not just pleasure, even though they could be pleasurable, like eating ice cream. If you don't eat ice cream 6 days of the week, eat it on Sabbath, right? If that's your gift, it's okay. Do things that are delightful to you and your family, that fill you up, that are exciting to do, the kinds of things that you ought to say no to all week long. You get to do it on Sabbath. It makes Sabbath special and life-giving and fun and filled with joy and pleasure. And then the fourth movement is worship.
Andrew, just stop there. The fourth one. I got neighbors at the door. 1 second.
Go for it.
Well, believe it or not, just after Andrew and I began talking about who we are when we're interrupted, 2 little girls from my neighbor's house knocked on my door and actually asked if I would buy some chocolate to support their gymnastics club. Given the fact that we were talking about being willing to be interrupted and who we are when we are interrupted, I thought I better answer the door, and I may have bought a few chocolate bars. All right, so this is hilarious. Girl, my neighbors came next door selling bars. So what were we saying about interruptions?
I was just going to say, I can't believe you. You left me hanging here. I'm so done with this. I'm tired of these interruptions.
I'm so sorry, man.
Don't be.
Yeah.
Don't be. That's lovely.
I was like, how do I ignore these, or do I let myself be interrupted here after just getting that counsel? So number 4, so you were saying.
Let's go. I love that. I love that. What a gift. Number 4 is worship. And, and that's why we go to church on Sundays. Like we're supposed to, if Sabbath is the day that we go to church, then that's why we worship. And the idea with it isn't just going to church and singing, the contemporary Christian songs. The idea is like, turn your attention to God that day. Like it's a chance for you don't have other things you have to do. You don't have to do the yard work. You can spend time with Jesus, and you can turn your attention to him through prayer and through just like with your family around the dinner table, thanking God and actually like embodying gratitude. That's worship. Naming Jesus by name as the source of all that is good in your life and everything you have. And you do that together as a family. Sometimes it is maybe singing a song together or reading a thought or a hymn or a prayer or something like that. Whatever would be worshipful in your family to turn your attention, orient your attention individually and then collectively with whoever you're Sabbathing with in the direction of Jesus as King and recognizing his presence with you in that space. So they're kind of the 4 movements: to stop, rest, delight, and worship. And we found those to be very helpful, practical guides to what to do practically on a Sabbath.
Totally. No, I love that because it doesn't need to feel heavy. If it feels like, oh, this is a lot of work to do, which it will feel countercultural, it will feel counterintuitive, it will feel like unproductive. But if it feels like a burden, I would say maybe consider if you're Sabbathing. But that whole idea of turning your attention to God, man, just being aware of his presence is such a game changer. It doesn't have to be reading the Bible and praying every day. There's so many different ways to turn your attention to the Lord. Like you said, with the people that you have, people do all sorts of different things for Sabbath, but let's just repeat those for their sake. Stop, rest, delight, and worship. Consider how you can incorporate some of those things to your Sabbath, this one day with your family, and commit to it. It will not feel like it's doing anything for probably the first while. But after that, my experience is you fight. It feels like warfare at first. Like you said, some of those days are going to be like your worst days. You're feeling unproductive, without purpose. But it can be very beautiful. Yeah. Andrew, thanks so much chatting on this. Any last thoughts on Sabbath before I chat about one more thing with you?
I just wanted to end off where we started, which is like, just take the time to do the inventory on what it is that you actually want to be and become. Yeah. And to be really practical, like some of you guys listening, it might be like you have a strained relationship with one of your kids who's a teenager or an adult, and that weighs on you so much. And I just want to tell you, like, the invitation is Jesus actually wants to restore that relationship, and he wants to use you to do that. And if that's what you ultimately want, you prioritize. You prioritize that and you stop and you focus on what it is that I need to do to get there. For some of you, there is a desire to be able to contribute to kind of the kingdom in a special and unique financial way. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you work less necessarily, but it's being able to slow down and stop and doing the inventory on like, who is God calling me to be, and what do I want to be known as, but what do I really want to experience in life? And who's that person going to be in 10 years, and what do I need to get there? Because that's where it all starts. If it starts with the religious question of like, are you doing the rules? You're already starting with the wrong place. Yeah. And if you're just getting started with something like that, start with the place of like, who is it that I can become. And I promise you, actually, Jesus wants to meet you right there. That's where he
Yeah.
wants to meet you, because he has some answers for you. If the question is to Jesus, who ought I become? And he's also built you in a particular way to be able to answer that question, because you have you are made in the image of the living God. And those deep rooted desires that you live with every single day, that you want to live into, that you constantly feel like you're behind on, those are probably the places that he wants to start with. And those are actually the pieces of you that he wants to feed and to develop and to form into the future. So just start there. That's a great place to start.
Yeah, that's brilliantly said, man. We always want to jump to the what do I do rather than who am I to become. Andrew, before we sign off, I just want to say and welcome people that are listening, especially those outside of Ontario. And even those inside of Ontario, November 18th, we've got a big event coming up that you're kind of helping us to be a part of. It's our men's conference here in Burlington, Ontario. Andrew's going to be hosting the simulcast. And so if you can be in the room, it's going to be a great experience for guys. If you can't be in the room, we want to invite you guys to watch online. Please check it out at impactus.org/events. And Andrew, you're going to be the host of the online conference.
Yeah, it's going to be way more fun online, guys. Promise you, it's going to be a blast. So, no, if you can't make it in person, join us online. It is a great opportunity for men to get together and ask the question together as men: who does God want us to become? Who has he called us to become? And so, as we ask that question, we also want to have fun and delight and experience joy and rest together with men, and trusting that there's a God who's got it all in control, and he's moving us somewhere, and he's got something for us that if we live into it, what a gift of a life that'll be. So yeah, strongly encourage you, tune in online or show up in person if you can.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Listen, man, thanks again for joining in today, even from your own office at the church. Appreciate you making this work today, man. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Thanks, Jordan.
See you, man.